Hi, everybody. This is Dan Stolbarger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East update. It's the week of October 23rd. And before we get started, just a reminder to make sure you go to our website, holygroundexplorations.com, in order to access the PDF PowerPoint that accompanies this YouTube. Now, just as normal, we begin with what we call our news bites, and we've got a lot to cover, so let's just jump right in. It's happening, more normalization. Jerusalem and Khartoum, think Sudan, are will be signing a historic normalization agreement. In the political world in Israel, for so many years, Likud has just sort of controlled Israeli politics. That's the party of Benjamin Netanyahu. And you know that part of his support is the Orthodox community. So it's interesting with everything that's going on in COVID that Yamnia, the new up-and-coming right political party, it looks as if now, if they combine with two others, right-leaning parties in Israel, Yesh Atid, as well as Israel Betanyu, basically Betanyu, that is, that they could form a majority, a 61-seat coalition government that excludes Likud, as well as the Orthodox parties. And so we're beginning to see a movement towards this. We'll see if there's a no confidence in this unity government and new elections. It's hard to imagine Israel without Likud in control, without Benjamin Netanyahu, but it appears that this is the direction the pendulum is starting to swing. Vaccine, COVID vaccine. It shall be called, are you ready for this? Bri Life. Israel's unveiled a COVID vaccine. It's been developed by the Israeli Institute for Biological Research, and it's now ready for clinical trials. The name Bri, health in the Hebrew, and Israel, or life. So it's health for Israel and life. Bri Life. So that's the new COVID vaccine. Now let's jump into our main articles. We have a television show on Israel. This is sort of the mindset of the Palestinians versus Israel. A well-known quote by Benjamin Netanyahu: if the Arabs put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there would be no more Israel. So there's a scene on a news show in the West Bank, a self-sacrificing fighter. It's produced by Hamas on Alaska TV, and it has to do with a armed terrorist entering a restaurant in Tel Aviv and shoots and murders Israeli Jewish diners. And following the attack, a Palestinian woman is being interrogated by Israelis investigators. Now listen carefully. She explains, while Islam forbids murdering civilians, killing Israelis and Jews is actually justified because Israelis and Jews are all criminals. So when you hear about these plans for peace, two-state solution, negotiating Hamas, Israel, Fatah, just keep this in mind, okay? There will not be a negotiated peace of any significance at all when in the Arab Fatah, Hamas mind, the only thing to be done with Israel is not to recognize them as an Israeli or as a state, but to annihilate them. That's the mindset. Some irony in the Palestinian Authority, no big surprise here. The iconic Palestinian official negotiator, Saab Erekat, has chosen to treat his COVID at where? In Ramallah? No. In Turkey? No. In fill in the blank, Jordan? No. But he's checked into Israel's Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem to treat him for his disease. Now we're reading that he's in grave condition at this point in time. Recently, he actually had a lung transplant, again done in Israel. And so on the critical list, there now is a movement with bereaved family members who have Hamas still controls and actually has fallen soldiers in the IDF. And there is now a movement that says if this Saab actually perishes, dies, that his body shouldn't be released until the Israeli IDF soldiers' bodies are released as well. And this is gaining momentum in Israel. So imagine the political fallout if Israel decides not to return his body. Anti-Semitism. We always talk about the growth of anti-Semitism. Did you know that on Twitter and Facebook alone, that 1.7 million anti-Semitic posts were made in the first 8 months of this year? 1.7 million. And then this is a shocker. Absurd news coming out of Paris as a criminal court in the French capital has determined, are you ready for this? Swastikas are not necessarily deemed as anti-Semitic. Sure. Well, a corona update. We talked about this new vaccine in Israel. Right now, the health ministry in Israel has cautious optimism that Israel has finally gotten the second wave of this coronavirus outbreak under control, saying that the mortality is now at its lowest rates since June and continues to decline. So Israel is looking for suitable ways in their process of reopening. Our friends in Sorel, our ground operators, and a friend of ours, Amir Safadi, have basically told us one believes that Israel may just reopen in January. Amir thinks it's going to be early February. We do have some tours coming up that begin in mid-February, so we're praying that those doors would be open. And if you've never been to Israel or you want to return, check out the last slide here, because it's going to talk about the trips that we have in 2021. We would love for you to join us. Saudis, normalization. Again, Sudan this week. Did you know that 79% of the Saudis are in favor of normalization, a deal with Israel, and they're seeing it over the next 5 years? Again, the Trump administration is trying to make this a quicker turnaround, but that's significant. 79% of Saudis are in favor of normalization. Then this week, terror tunnels back in the news in Gaza. From Khan Yunis in Gaza, that's sort of central, more towards the Mediterranean side, southern central Gaza. There is discovered a tunnel that actually penetrates about 10 to 12 meters into Israel, discovered by the Israelis and destroyed by the Israelis. Against these terror tunnels, terrorists in the past have used these subterranean passageways to penetrate Israel territory to launch attacks. We know that it was used, these sort of tunnels were used in the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit, and just the threat. Imagine what it would be like to know that there are underground tunnels that emerge on the Israeli side of the border. And then our last article is dealing with recent IDF strikes in Syria. IDF tanks reportedly struck Hezbollah military assets located in Quneitra, in the Syrian-controlled part of the Golan Heights. Again, if you've been with us to Israel, if you've been on Mount Bental up in the Golan, or if you've taken our Jeep tour to the Syrian border, Quneitra is very much visible, a couple football fields away maybe from the border. And so again, Benny Gantz, who's now the defense minister, his quote is, "We will not allow terrorist entities aligned with Hezbollah or Iran to entrench themselves on Israel's Golan Heights border. And we will do whatever is necessary to push them back." So this last week, we've had airstrikes outside of Damascus, and we have tank strikes in the Quneitra area. So again, no big news because this is sort of ongoing, but we'll again take that wait and see attitude. So that's this week's Middle East update. Again, as we approach the elections in the U.S., we'll keep our eyes on the Middle East and how it's impacted by what's taking place here in America as well. So again, if you're wise, you keep your eyes on Israel, and we're reminded to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So with that, shalom.